Hi, Craig.
Good evening, Craig. All right, cool. There we go. I'll make the rest work.
Sounds good.
Craig. Well, welcome back to another episode of Scouting Stuff You Should Know. This is missed the last one, but that's okay. Scheduling conflicts, it's all good. You have got two of us this evening. Scouter Ken is here, and at the other end of the socially distant internet link, Scouter Colin.
Hello.
Hi, good evening, Colin. How are you?
Very well, Scouter Ken. Yourself?
It's been a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's certainly been that for sure.
I don't know. It's like the last couple of weeks has been like 2020 in a microcosm, right? It's just like the year just kind of keeps rolling along, and it's like, what new crazy thing is going to happen this month? And the last couple of weeks have just been that. It's been blah.
I agree.
Yeah.
So what have you been up to for the most part? How has work been?
Projects, just finishing up projects. I more or less wrapped up 2 different projects over the last couple of weeks. And this week is kind of just about sort of follow up on that, and then, finally looping back to some of the code that I got to deal with and what have you. But trying to track down a persistent bug in the code that I have no idea why it's happening. It shouldn't be, but there it is.
Is it repeatable at least?
Oh, yeah, consistently.
Oh.
And I know exactly which line of code is the issue. I just don't know why this line of code is causing an issue when it doesn't at 9 other points in the program.
I got you.
Yeah. So that's fun.
Mm-hmm.
But, and yeah, beyond that, I mean, school's done. We paused scouting for a couple of weeks, and the world is still crazy. So, business as usual.
Yes, very much so.
Et toi, comment ça va?
Bien. Cindy and I have been working on the deck out back, so we've got a section of it stripped down and ready for stain. So hopefully that'll happen in the next little bit. We need a couple of uninterrupted days of weather. Of good weather, I should say, not bad weather.
Yeah, we got that, just not the right kind of weather.
Yeah, that's right. I want the good weather, please. So, working on that, and then work is just trundling right along. It's we're into that situation now where customers are starting to ask us to travel to sites and things like that. So, some of which are in the US, so it makes one kind of leery, but I mean, for the most part, our product is very, shall we say, intuitive for those that are mechanically minded.
Right.
So, I mean, it shouldn't need me to go and install it somewhere. But I have taken a more methodical approach to it and offered to be available for like video chats and that kind of thing on site if necessary, right? Do the Zoom meeting or the Google meeting or the whatever, right? And be present, and they can just show me what they're dealing with, and I can tell them how to address it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, but yeah, that's about it for me. It's been pretty quiet on the home front. A lot of the new norm, same. Working from home for the most part. I think I spend a total of 8 hours at the shop, just to drop off stuff or pick stuff up, or have the in-person conversations that you can't really have the types of conversations that are better to have in person than to have over the phone or video chat or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. There's some stuff that is better said face to face.
Well, it adds a certain gravitas to the discussion, right? That you're there as opposed to, just picking up the phone and making a phone call kind of thing, right?
For sure. Well, and as we discussed previously, there's some stuff that, you don't have a full-fledged bench at home, so.
Oh, yes, that is true. And, so far so good. Cindy and I are just trying to keep ourselves socially distant for the most part, and that we've done the social visits where it's like the social distance visit where you sit in someone's backyard or on someone's driveway, and they sit on one side and you sit on the other, and you have a chat, right, and that kind of thing. So
yeah, we haven't done a lot of that, but it is good to see other people.
Yeah, we've had a couple of those, so that's nice in one way. But it's certainly interesting, this new normal that's starting to percolate through.
Yeah. Well, speaking of new normal, oh my gosh, I have so many topics that I want to cover, and I think I only have the energy to talk about the new normal because it's actually what I've been dealing with for most of the day.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Which is to say...
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, which is to say, of course, Scouts Canada's firm but nebulous plans for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
I don't know if it makes any sense to put it that way, but that's how I'm going to put it because it's what I got.
Well, I think that's generally people's, startup methodology is like, we'll make it ambiguous to start with and see what happens so that we can narrow it down more.
Yeah, it's it sucks that we seem to be in a on the one hand it makes sense, right? So I don't know, so we've been having a lot of planning meetings with the different scouters at the different sections of the 59th and the group committee too, just all in the last week or so, trying to really figure out what the go-ahead strategy is going to be, because BSA, so Scouts BSA, they have been tailoring their, they have largely farmed it out to the councils, or so it seems, right? So, I have my contacts in North Dakota, scout troops that I was visiting as recently as February, talking with them, they're basically back to face-to-face meetings, right? Now, of course, if you look at North Dakota, they've had a almost negligible amount of cases. Can't talk, need to have some water. They've had very, very few cases in North Dakota. So for them, yeah, sure. I mean, resuming face-to-face, resuming school, it's not a big deal. There's not a lot of people in North Dakota to begin with, and they've had very few cases. So for them, things are kind of moving, they have moved back to almost the old normal. And they're still, taking precautions as they go about meetings, but they're doing in-person meetings again. Scouts in New York? Nah, not so much.
Yeah.
Or Texas, right? Texas, well, some parts of Texas, yes, some parts of Texas, no. There's multiple councils. But Philmont has canceled all of their summer program for the year. Where is that? New Mexico? Yeah. They were thinking about maybe doing a limited opening of programs, but the state, which like I say, I think is New Mexico, is just nah, sorry guys, can't do it.
Yeah.
So they're shut down for the year, which is, that sucks for them. And for all the troops that would have otherwise had a Philmont slot this year, because you got to book 3 years in advance to go. So, and they had already had to delay and defer a bunch of people attending because of the wildfires. So, anyways, but Scouts Canada is not taking that approach. Scouts Canada is taking a national approach, And unfortunately, the national approach is tailored to the worst case scenarios that we're seeing in Canada. So like Quebec, Ontario, right, the places where we've had the most number of cases. And so their approach is, generally speaking, more restrictive. And unfortunately, we do not get to resume meetings until minimum September. So we've lost the summer, which sucks.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know what the official line for Scouts Canada was this year. So
yeah, there are to be okay. So they've done it, and like it's funny because this was the last episode we did, and like I say, I've had 3 different topics brewing pretty much since the last episode published because everything happened all at once, right? And like I still want to talk about the BP statue, although I don't know if we need to because like I may actually ask Justin from Scouting Radio if I can just borrow some of the content he has put out about it and like edit that into an episode because he's been having some really great discussions on Scouting Radio about like the statue of BP at Pool Key and BP's history with regards to things like Africa and Africans and you know the Nazis and things like that. Like he's been doing some really really great journalism to sort of really put all the cards on the table, but ultimately approaching it from the perspective of like we should keep the statue. And to be fair, they're not actually going to take the statue away. They boarded it up. But like I say, that's one of the topics I've had around. I actually really want to do an episode, although this is going to be like a much harder episode to do, about youth protection in light of a certain former scouter of ours being released on his own recognizance again in the Edmonton area.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So, like I've got some ideas in the back of my mind about how I want to approach that too. But this is literally like a day, maybe 2 after we released the last episode, which is already going to be a month ago now, but whatever. Scouts Canada published their, and literally the email was called A New Normal, right? So and in all of the correspondence I've had with my fellow scouters since then, it's like, have you read the New Normal email yet? Like, it just, So, and now you've said it a couple of times too. And I mean, in a way it is, right? Like, I think the post-COVID reality is going to be different.
It's ever going to be the. I don't know if it's ever going to be the same, right? It's kind of like those major events, the major meteorological events, right? You have like, Katrina in the States, right? When you talk to people in the southern states that experience Katrina, it's either before Katrina or after Katrina. That's
a dividing line in time.
Yes. So, you're going to be affected by what you experienced, right? So
yeah, for sure. And I mean, like, we've lived through some of those things, like we talk not as much anymore, but for a while, the idea of pre 9/11 and post 9/11, right? Like that was another dividing line in time.
Black Friday in Edmonton.
Black Friday, the tornado. My dad and I were reminiscing about that a couple of weeks back. Yeah. If you can call it reminiscing. But
what basement were you hiding in? I know which basement.
I was at home. I was at home. But just so actually your dad kind of came up in that too, because we were talking about how there used to be, like, now they've built, it's that building right next to the LRT, to the South Campus LRT station. I want to say it's like something to do with like cancer treatment and research, but I'm not entirely sure.
It's the radioisotopes building.
Yeah, that's the one. Just north of the School for the Blind, right? Yeah. School for the Deaf. Sorry, School for the Deaf.
School for the Deaf, and then just south of South Campus LRT station.
Yeah. So, but like back in the 80s, there used to be like that was undeveloped land, and there used to be a series of like garden plots, public garden plots. And I remember this because my family had one, and your dad would sometimes be the one to come in and sort of clear up the garden plots at the end of the year, right? Like sort of till the land and whatever else.
Yes,
at least in my parents' recollection. So yeah, he was kind of a factor. He was kind of an element, a character in the story too. But that was that year the tornado struck. That was the last year my parents had a garden plot.
Oh, yes.
They didn't do it again afterwards. I think it got significantly damaged from like the wind.
Yeah.
But anyways, so yeah, there are these dividing lines in time, and this is one. 2020 is going to be one for probably a few reasons. The coronavirus being one of them. Obviously, the George Floyd murder and the subsequent protests. That's kind of like we've had a couple of them already, and I'm hoping 2020 is done with throwing things at us. But yeah, however we're coming out of this, things are going to be different. And especially with like in regard to the coronavirus and some of the ways things will be different, right? Me as an office worker. Well, I mean, okay, I mostly work from home anyway, so whatever, not a big deal. But there's been some discussion that I've seen like via email that like they're contemplating and it was funny too because when I first like went to our Edmonton office, the entire outer ring of the floor was actual physical offices separated by walls, right? They had a door. And there were a few cubicles here and there, but it was mostly offices. And then when ownership changed, right, because the company I worked for initially got bought out, they demolished most of the offices because they wanted to go to sort of that more open I mean, they still had full height cubicle walls, so it's more like a semi-open thing, but they wanted to go to that more open plan concept thing, right?
More like choose your own office kind of thing, as opposed to everyone has a set workstation.
Well, that's a completely. I was talking. That's a separate discussion.
Yeah. So that wasn't the concept they were going for. They were going.
No. Like you have a desk and your nameplate attached to a single desk, but still, like they went with sort of that more open concept. Well, that is something that I've heard speculation might wind up going away or being de-emphasized post-COVID because that allows for airflow that would allow viral particles, whether it's a cold or some new and novel virus, to spread much farther, right? Than if it's just you in your office. So we might see actual physical offices, floor to ceiling walls, making a return, the death of the open plan space. That wouldn't be the worst thing. But then also, what you were talking about, the hot desking concept, right? Where you don't really have a desk. There's just sort of, go there. It's free today, right? Well, you don't know who was there coughing all over the desk yesterday. And I was talking with one of the mums at school about this. School is over, but the playgrounds here have reopened. And I mean, like we've mostly been keeping the kids off of them, but there was they did a thing where for the grade 1 teachers, the grade 1 teachers basically had like a table set up in front of the school on like the second to last day, and the students could come by and obviously like maintaining their distance, but like come like wave, say hi, talk for a little bit, and say their farewells for the year. Kind of a bittersweet thing, but the playground at the school was open, and so afterwards the kids were playing around, and one of the other mums and I were talking. She works for one of the telco providers in their, I think, marketing department. And she was saying that, like for her team, hot desking was just the thing. And she's like, yeah, we're not going back to that. So anyways, but yeah, no, Scouts Canada, shortly after we published our last episode, did issue their new normal. Now, to be fair, right now, a lot of this stuff is in draft, right?
Okay.
So they're still accepting well, I think the feedback window has closed. Yes, it has. The feedback period is now closed.
They're now in the policy drafting stage as opposed to the getting feedback stage. Okay.
Yeah. So, but one thing that I think is not going to change is the fact that basically there's no in-person scouting activities for the remainder of summer. Starting in September, we can maybe look at doing section meetings. And they've produced a flow chart. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes. They've produced a flow chart determining Like basically, hey, can you have a meeting, right? And I gotta read through this just because when you get to the end, there's a bit of a punchline. Okay.
Okay.
So start here.
It's not,
Meeting location.
to stop you just for a second, Ken. It's not the flow chart that was hanging up in the den for all those years, right?
No, it is not. Oh, I wish I had a photo of that because I'd totally put that up as the episode art. Except I think there's some profanity on it, so maybe that's a bad idea.
Did you break it? No. Did anyone see you break it? No.
Will you catch trouble for it? I don't think the word is trouble. Yes. Oh well. No, it's not that. So, anyway, but here though. Okay, so first meeting location. Inside, stop. Can't have inside meetings until further notice. Okay, that's the first thing. Okay, it's an outside meeting. Fine, let's continue. Do you plan to camp overnight? Yes? Okay, wait, stop. There's additional standards that you have to refer to. Okay, fine. No? Okay, you're not camping overnight? Good. Is your group less than 50 people in total? No? Okay, well, you have to stop. Okay, yes, your group is less than 50 people in total. Is your program modified to 2 patrols, 6 to 8 youth maximum each, so with less than 16 youth in total? No. Stop. Yes. Is an attendee sick? Yes. Okay, they can't come. No exceptions. No, nobody's sick. Okay, cool. Is an attendee a vulnerable person? Yes. Well, okay, they can maybe come, but they should carefully consider if they pose an acceptable risk to themselves or their extended friends and family. And if they're not, are all persons screened and pass the screening? If no, then no, they can't participate, no exceptions. If yes, has the activity been modified for physical distancing? If no, then stop. If yes, is sharing of equipment or food required? There's a bit of a caveat here, and we'll discuss that presently. But in general, if the answer is yes, stop. If the answer is no, are there cleaning and hygiene plans in place? If no, then stop. If yes, have drop-up and pick-up procedures been modified? If no, then stop. And if yes, enjoy your adventure. Have fun.
Well.
So, yeah. There's the punchline. I jest, but so this kind of is illustrative of a lot of the new standards that they have been publishing, and we'll get into some of the details, I hope, throughout the course of this episode. But literally, this dropped like a day or two after we did our last episode. And I mean, some of it is about what you would expect, right? Obviously, you can't go to the grocery store. It's without, seeing the sign. Hey, do you have symptoms? Cool. Come on in. If not, otherwise, please leave. Things like that, right? So I totally get that. If somebody is sick, and to be fair, I've actually kind of been urging this already. I've never been a fan of, the parents who send their kid to school, the kid is obviously has a bad cold and they're just snuffling and it's just blah, right? Yeah. Don't send the kid to school, don't send the kid to scouts. I've been urging this for years. Mostly it falls on deaf ears. I'm actually kind of glad that now I have some force of policy behind me to say, no, seriously, go home.
Yeah.
The attendee being a vulnerable person, right? So, I mean, this would be people with other pre-existing health conditions, comorbidities in medical parlance. This would be, some of my more aged scouters. But at least they're leaving it to the individual's discretion, right? It's basically, you're at heightened risk. If that's an acceptable risk to you to take part in this activity, then sure. And if not, then okay. Well, you know what? We'll see you when we see you.
Well,
screening. Well, sorry. Yeah.
I was gonna chime in there, and I think what I foresee happening in the not too distant future is really it is all about tracing, right? And can you keep tabs on who you come into contact with in your day, right?
Yeah.
So if you are feeling ill and you get tested, there's a path to contact everybody that's in that sphere and be able to tell them to isolate or do whatever, right? So
for sure.
So
and that kind of goes more towards the screening, right?
Yeah.
This is the same as like we've been going back to mass now, and churches are open again, and that's been good, right? But they have to check our names off a list, and we get there, and there's someone asking.
You have to reserve a spot.
We did.
Yeah,
we did. Call the parish office and reserve a spot. You show up, they check your names off the list, they ask you the usual screening questions, been out of the country, any symptoms, blah, blah, blah. But hey, at least we can start to gather again as a community. Granted, we can't, we're still sitting like 2 pews apart from each other, but whatever. It's a thing, right? Something that I've been anxious to get back to, and I'm glad we can. Even under these odd, these odd but necessary constraints. But, part of that screening process is making sure that we have contact information for everybody who's going to be there. Now, the nice thing about the scouting program is we kind of have that already. You have to give that to us in order to sign up.
That's kind of been built into the structure of the program anyways. But.
Yeah, we already have that. So it's not really a big deal to, have further reliance on it, Now that said, one challenge, which was introduced a little bit earlier on in the flowchart, is they're currently recommending that, obviously, right now, and again, this is where the scouting standard is going to be potentially at odds with some of the provincial standards, right? Because I think in Alberta now, the maximum gathering protests notwithstanding, the maximum gathering number has been increased to 100, if I'm not mistaken. I think it has.
To 100? I only thought it was still 50, but maybe I'm a release short of reading.
I think it has been increased because I'm pretty sure there were more than 50 people at mass.
All right.
So I had thought that it was at 100.
Looking that up still, right now, so I'll find that out.
There we go. So the point is, though, as different provinces shift their standards accordingly, the scouting standard of, the activity having a maximum total population of 50 people, scouters, youth, parents, and anybody that needs to be there to run the event, that seems to be an absolute. Okay. It's not really a big deal, right? Obviously, that's the standard and we will abide by it. But, that is one potential area where the scouting standard is, maybe going to be different than what would be the standard if you just wanted to hang out with a bunch of people in a particular province.
So, for clarification purposes, according to the Alberta government website, it says we are at 100 people maximum outdoor events and indoor seated audience events, including weddings and funeral ceremonies.
Okay.
It says 50 people maximum indoor social gatherings, including weddings and funeral receptions. So you can have the ceremony at 100 people, but you can't have a reception at 100 people inside. You could have 100 outside.
Yeah. And I think the difference is, if you think about a wedding ceremony, right? That's going to take place. If you think about a wedding ceremony in a church, right? Unless it's a very small church, and I think about St. Joseph's College at the U of A campus, right? That's just a very small church. I don't even think they've reopened for services yet because it's such a tiny space anyways. There's really no point, right?
Well, and they say there's no caps on the number of people with public health measures in place for worship gatherings, restaurants, cafes, lounges and bars, casinos and bingo halls. So,
sure.
Provided that everybody's following the public health measures, there's no cap by the looks of it.
Right. But that's the point, right? If everybody is following the public health measures of staying 2 meters apart in St. Joseph's Chapel, that's 10 people.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it's a little bit different at my parish here where I live, where, I think the rated capacity is in the order of about 700. There's a lot of space to spread people out in, right? St. Basil's, the parish that I was baptized at, like that's a monstrously large church. So they could easily fit 100 people in there and keep spacing just fine.
Yep.
But St. Joe's, not so much. So again, like it's kind of ultimately it is dependent on the space too. But like, okay, fine. The scouting standard is going to be 50 people total. All right. The harder limit for us, right? Because our registration rolls this year, like we have, I can't remember the exact number, more than 40 registered Cubs. So any activity has to be modified so that, it can be done by less than 16 youth in total. I think that would technically make 15 the maximum. Split into 2 patrols, right? Whether that's colonies, lairs, patrols, you're splitting a venture company up, whatever. And that's going to be a challenge, right? Because, we've done it before, actually, where, we've had rotation-based events, right? Where, we'll have like 2 lairs go one place, 2 lairs go another place, 2 lairs go another place, and then we mix it up week after week. So everybody rotates through all 3 activities, but at different times. And I think we're going to be doing a lot more of that. But of course, ratio is what it is. So for larger groups, you're going to need even more volunteers to really continue to realize program under that guideline, right? To do it well. Technically, if you have less than 16 youth, you only need 2 scouters. But practically speaking, you may need more than 2 scouters to actually help deliver program. It really depends on what you're doing. Especially because it has to be outside. No inside meetings until 2021 minimum. Which is going to make winter.
Not that that's insurmountable, but it certainly does put a hamper on what you can do.
Like, in a way, it's going to be good, right? Because in a way, it's going to allow us to just kind of go back to, a lot of the stuff that scouting should be about, right? Like, a lot of the program is supposed to be focused on the outdoors. It's going to be really good to not be in the gymnasium week over week. That's actually going to be, that could be a very beneficial thing until it hits minus 40. But, whatever. We'll do a virtual meeting that week, I guess. Virtual meetings are, of course, still suggested to remain a programming option for the foreseeable future. But yeah, like, so for larger groups, there's going to have to be a lot of there's going to be more expectations placed on volunteers. There's going to be a lot more schedule foo that's going to have to happen in order to really make that work, right? Because if you have to split up 40 odd youth in such a way that they're each doing activities in groups of not more than 15 people, that could be a challenge.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair, I don't know if I'm going to have that many coming back for 2021, but I still got to get through the rest of 2020 because that was another thing that they announced.
Fill me in. What was the announcement?
Well, so normally we've done scouting years to follow the school year, right? So we have 2019 to 2020, right?
Right.
Not anymore. Not anymore.
Oh.
Now, the 2019-2020 season has been extended through to the end of 2020. And going forward, the plan is to have registration be for the calendar year.
Okay.
Yeah. Now,
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but that's okay. I think, like in my headspace, I would think that the following the school year would make more sense because that's generally how most things run, right? Like most extracurricular activities and that kind of stuff follow a calendar year.
Usually.
Or not a calendar, but like a school calendar year.
Yeah, the school year rather, yeah. So, yeah, it has caused some consternation amongst some of the scouters. I'll confess, I'm actually, it's not that I don't have some reservations is the wrong word. I do see where it'll represent a challenge. I really do. But equally, I'm kind of excited about it. I'm actually a little bit giddy about it because it kind of forces us to think about summer.
True.
You know, it forced, instead of summer being that disposable 2 to 3 months at what is technically the end of the year.
Yeah.
Now summer is right in the middle of our program. We can't just ignore it. We can't just wind down for that time.
Yeah.
Which is good.
That'll be an interesting take on it.
Yeah. Like I like that this kind of forces a rethink of scouting as we've tended to do it, which is to, sort of make it a 3/4 of the year thing with limited activities during the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Now it kind of forces us to take a more year-round approach, which is something I've wanted, and I've not really maybe been as forceful as is my heart's desire to really try and implement that. I've tried in some years more than others to sort of emphasize the need for a summer program, but now it's thrust upon us here, right? Like we actually have to think about it, and we can't just ignore the summer anymore. So in that way, I think it could wind up being very, very good. Like I say, I can see a lot of benefit to it. I can also see, of course, where there is going to be a lot of challenge for groups, especially when it comes to volunteers, because that's the perennial struggle of just about every scout group.
Yeah.
And making sure that the youth are split up in such a way that they can abide by these guidelines and abide by distancing requirements and all of that, but then still deliver a strong program on top of that. You're going to need more people in red shirts.
Yeah.
And
you're going to need, as they open it up to more people, if you're still required to maintain the social distance guidelines and all that kind of stuff, you're going to have to find creative ways of doing, of utilizing space, right?
Yep. And
that school gymnasium is no longer going to be, we
can't even use it. We can't even use it until January.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
At the earliest.
Yeah.
So that's going to be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What else is there? There's a bunch of other stuff. Physical distancing. Yeah, I'm going through the requirements. Oh, right. So, now, obviously that's the flow chart. Now, there, so like when it comes to, things like meeting location, okay, fine. We're going to be meeting outside pretty much for the foreseeable future. That's not a bad thing. Scouting is a lot about outside. That's all right. Overnight camping, we'll talk about that in a little bit because there's a bunch of changes around that and a bunch of stuff. 50 people total, 2 patrols of 68 youth, less than 16 youth in total. Obviously, if someone's sick, they can't be there. If they're a vulnerable person, they really got to assess the risk for themselves and make a decision. Screening, that's become pretty much standard. My wife volunteered as the screener for our daughter's fastball team.
Oh, yeah.
But she's actually like the perfect person for that because some of the shifts that she gets called in for is the screening desk at the hospital.
Yeah. Here's your thermometer and your
the questionnaire and blah blah blah. Towards the end of the flow chart, equipment or food sharing. So this is where it gets a little funky because it's not quite as simple as just is or is not equipment and food sharing required. Like in general, when they talk about like food provision in the new standards, the draft standard says that food provision for regular meetings should be minimized. And obviously food or drink sharing is prohibited.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, otherwise it just falls back on compliance with federal, municipal, or provincial regulations as applicable. It gets a little bit funnier when you actually get to talking about camping. And so maybe let's just pick apart some of the new requirements around camping. Overnight camps for packs, troops, companies, and crews, so that's Cubs through Rovers. Day and overnight camping is allowed if permitted by local, municipal, and provincial regulations. generally speaking, they do want to discourage overnight camping for cub packs. And the standard urges that this should be considered on an exception basis after rigorous review of risk controls commensurate with the planned activity. Day camping is strongly recommended for the cub pack. Overnight is not. Okay. And beavers are entirely prohibited from overnight camping. I will admit that among the bits of feedback I shared with Scouts Canada was my strong objection to that. But, currently that is the standard as it exists right now. We will see if it gets revised in the wake of the feedback that they have been collecting for the last month or so. I hope that we don't lose camping for beavers, because listeners who've been with us since the beginning will no doubt recall that I have at various points enthused quite significantly about the fact that, right around the time that my daughter joined as a beaver, as a browntail, was about when the camping standards for beavers were relaxed so that parents were no longer required to be present for overnight camps. And that requirement that the parents were supposed to be there was really, really limiting because, of course, it's one thing, it's one thing for parents to be able to send their kids on a camping trip with a scout troop for a weekend. It's much more impactful to their schedule to have to also then be present for that trip. And when that requirement was relaxed, that opened up a world of possibilities. Before then, Damboree was a single day event. You show up Saturday morning, you leave Saturday evening, that's it. Damboree after that became this 2-night extravaganza. It became an adventure camp, and probably one of the best darn adventure camps that gets held in Alberta for any section. Ringtail, if you're listening, thank you. Can't thank you enough for all that you did for that camp. And it sucks that we had to miss it this year. That option to take, and I mean, just within the 59th, we have taken the Beaver Scouts on some really just great adventures, overnight camps at different places. It opened up a world of possibilities, and it sucks that we're going to lose that. Even if it's only, for this year, it sucks because that was when the program, that was a shot in the arm for the Beaver program. It really was. It helped us. It was key, I think, in some respect. It was one of the pillars of how we were able to revitalize the Beaver program within the 59th. And so, I hope that the standard gets revised and we don't lose that entirely. But we may. We'll still have to take the beavers on lots of outdoor adventures. But, that was kind of one of the things that, and it's funny because Scouts Canada released a survey or results of a survey that they had done. And one of the things that stood out to me in the survey results that they released was that in this new normal, in this post-COVID world, a lot of parents expressed a desire for programming, youth-focused programming, that would build resilience in their children. And that is literally this. I see it with the Cubs and even with some of the newer Scouts too, right? But it's nothing like it is with the Beavers. And, there are so many Beaver Scouts that I have, because I've been involved with the colony now for 6 years. There are so many Beaver Scouts I've seen come through the program who, through this experience of being able, at age 5 to do an overnight trip without mom and dad there, the growth that brings, and watching some of them, yes, they have struggled with it and there's been challenges for them, but watching them, actually come through that challenge and, come to the end of the trip and being just wow, I just spent 2 nights in a cabin and I haven't seen my mom in 2 days and I had a ton of fun. That is resilience, that is the gateway to resilience right there. And so again, I really hope we don't lose that because that's a huge opportunity for youth, even at these young ages, 5, 6, 7, to really develop a sense of, like that sense of can do, and that sense of I will be fine. Anyways, the other parts of the camping standard that pertain to equipment, which is kind of what got me onto this soapbox here. Camping has to be conducted in tents or shelters. You can't use buildings, no cabins, nothing like that. And obviously outdoor activities only.
Okay.
So, if you want to build a lean-to, go right ahead and build a lean-to or otherwise pitch a tent, but you can't stay in the cabins at like Camp Woods or something like that, okay?
Right.
Sharing of a tent by 2 to 3 youth can be considered an acceptable risk, as long as there are other risk controls in place, screening, hygiene, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
And it's not, and basically it's that 2 to 3 youth thing. That's where the equipment sharing challenge comes in. And this might be why they don't want beavers to do this overnight, because in theory, that little bubble of 2 to 3 youth should really be, they should have like their camp stove and their camp cooking stuff and their food. And like, that is just like they're just their little unit at camp, and they share a tent. They share a stove and like a pot to cook food, but they don't actually share the food as they're eating it, right? Like, they make their meal and they eat their meals. And so maybe that's why, they kind of disallow the beavers from camping, because obviously, like, there's many more challenges to entrusting a 5-year-old to prepare their own food. Do I think that that's an insurmountable obstacle? I actually don't.
I don't think it's insurmountable. Like, I mean, I was just pondering on that while you were talking, and I'm like, I think like restaurants, you have servers, so I mean, you might lose some of the camp cooking side of beavers, like teaching them camp cooking. I don't know if that's really a thing that you would start teaching beavers, but there's always like the s'mores or the marshmallows, and those are individuals. And I mean, you can, someone who uses proper health protocol beforehand can separate out marshmallows into, individual Ziploc bags or whatever, right? Like,
we just buy, let's say we're taking a dozen beavers camping. We just buy 4 bags of marshmallows, right? That group of 3 gets one, that group of 3 gets one, that group of 3 gets one.
Yeah.
And I could see that working with other food stuff too, right? Like, I mean, obviously this would take more planning, and we would probably de-emphasize cooking, right? So we'd probably be looking at more foods that could just be eaten cold.
Yeah. Or you have the centralized cooking.
Well, that's the thing. I think that's disallowed.
Is it?
I think that's disallowed under the standard.
So you couldn't have your own food, your own dishes and your own cutlery. But
well, you can. Like, you're supposed to have your own mess kit, but in terms of like the food prep, I don't think you can have like, one centralized
person
meal prep
meal
prep person that serves everyone. I think each little unit has to prepare their own food. So that's what I mean. It is more of a challenge with the beavers. I can totally see that. But equally, I don't think it's an insurmountable challenge. It takes more planning, and it probably means that most of what you're going to be eating, or most of what the beavers is going to be eating, is stuff that can be eaten cold.
Yeah.
But not impossible. Not impossible, just takes more planning. So
I'm keen on doing some more research here.
Yeah. Well, and like I say, I hope the standard gets tweaked, modified, a little more definition.
Yeah. Very now, what is it? Ambiguous.
Yeah. So, like I said, like that's going to be a big. That is going to be one of the bigger challenges. I will concede. But like, could we do it with a cub pack? Absolutely. Like, I know that if I was careful with which cubs were allocated to which little bubble of 2 to 3, we could totally make it work, even if they were doing simple meal prep.
Yeah. Cubs, I think, is totally doable that way.
Yep. And scouts, well, we make the scouts cook their own damn food anyway. So.
Oh yeah.
Sorry. That's a
no-brainer at that point.
Shouldn't have said it that way, but we do. Yeah, the scouts cook their own food. Anyways, so I mean, again, like some challenges here, obviously, do I have enough camp stoves for every 2 to 3 people to have one stove that is just their stove? Might have to rely on a few families to supply stoves. But again, not an insurmountable obstacle.
No.
Necessarily.
No.
Just much more planning. Much more planning. Not that too much, not that more planning is necessarily a bad thing. The amount of paperwork has not increased too much. You still have to complete your adventure application forms. There will be a supplementary adventure pandemic readiness form.
Ah.
And then, of course, the ERP, the emergency response plan, must also, cover what to do should someone develop symptoms.
Great.
But, in terms of the actual amount of paperwork that attends going on an overnight camp anyways, it's not really a significant increase, which is good. That said, our troop's going to have to do more planning to be able to carry out programming. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be, that's going to be more work for the volunteers. And I mean, in some ways that's unfortunate. And in some ways, I hope that, most volunteers see that as a challenge that they're able to rise to.
Yeah.
Anything else in all of this? Drop off and pick up procedures modified. Well, if that's, they don't really explain exactly what they mean by that, but I mean, like that's, it's easy enough to space out cars in most cases. If it comes down to it, you could probably even schedule like, okay, will you please come pick up your son in this narrow window of time? Sort of like they did like with the, I mentioned that grade 1 farewell thing that they did with the teachers at the school, right?
Right.
Everybody had their time slot. My daughter's time slot was like 10 a.m., right? And she had like, it was like her 15 minutes that she got to just talk with her teacher at a distance. So you could do it that way too, I suppose. But so, yeah.
Well, and I mean, the way the medical profession is running with things anyways, it kind of makes sense to, you gotta have a jumping off point to start with. And, it may not be the best, or it may not be what you want as a jumping off point, but at least it's a start.
Yep. And that's the thing, right? Like, it's kind of the same, like I mentioned, going back to mass, right? Like, that's kind of, is it a bit of a chore? Absolutely. Especially going up to receive communion, right? Because the requirement, now it's different depending on which flavor of Catholic church you go to. If you go to the Ukrainians, you don't have to wear a mask going up because they're still giving it to you with a little spoon on the tongue. It's a disposable wooden spoon, so they can just collect them all and burn them afterwards. But still, if you go to the Archdiocese, though, you have to wear a mask as you approach. You receive in the hand. You step to the side. You doff your mask. You consume, and then you go sit down. Bit of a process.
Yep.
And when you have an armful of toddler, it's even more of a process.
Yes, I believe that.
So that's been my fun experience the last couple of weeks. But like equally, you know what? There's more of a challenge to it. But on the other hand, it's like, of all the things that I have wanted to go back to, I'm fine not being able to go to a bar. I don't play golf anyways. I've wanted desperately to go back to mass, and now I can. And if it's a little bit more of a chore to participate fully in the mass, just because of all the extra things I have to do, that's fine. I'm still there, and that's, a key thing for me. And you're exactly right. Like, it's not what we're used to, and it's not going to necessarily be easy. But it is something, and it does allow us to return to scouting. And I know a lot of scout groups have had actually really great success doing like the virtual scouting thing. Unfortunately, that hasn't really been our experience. The Beavers were largely not engaged with virtual scouting. The Cubs were, to a degree. The Scouts were, to a degree, but only some of them. And so, you know, we're going to have to kind of just keep doing the virtual scouting thing during the summer. We've got some plans around that, you know, like a virtual camp out, things like that. A few other meetings. But it'll be good to actually be able to return to doing things in person. And there, you know, there's a lot that you can do outdoors, right? There's a lot of opportunities to work on your scoutcraft skills, right? If you want to talk about the outdoor adventure skills, go for hikes, learn to build shelters, all kinds of stuff that you can do outdoors. Go and try.
I was going to say, there's a lot of bushcraft you can learn.
Yeah, there's a lot of bushcraft you can learn. There's a lot of ground you can pound. It's fascinating to actually dig into which plants are edible around here, because it'll surprise you how many of the weeds growing up through the sidewalk are in that category. There's all kinds of stuff. It'll take more planning and it'll take more volunteers. So maybe, though, you know, I don't know if I'm really have many strategies or suggestions to offer. But one thing that comes to mind is you've got the summer ahead. Priorities, I think, are going to be figuring out who's coming back. And because I think 2021 is going to be a bit of a lean year for membership. I can see that being the case.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping we bounce back in 2022 in that case. But you know what? Putting a survey to your members, because they're your members now. Well, I mean, first off, if you haven't been communicating with your members, this is a good time to start again, because they are like the scouts you have, the cubs you have, the beavers you have now. They are the cubs and scouts and beavers you have until December 31st. You know, like that's just the 2019-2020 season is now all of 2020. So who you have now on the roster, that's who you have on the roster until the end of the year. The rumor is that registration is going to open for 2021 in the fall, but no date has been announced. At least not that I've seen. As of the time we're recording this episode, which is the evening of Sunday, June 29th, for anybody who's curious. Watch. July 2nd, Scouts Canada will be just like, bam, registration is this day.
Yeah. Thanks, Canada.
Thanks, guys.
Maybe somebody listens to the podcast higher up and like plans their.
Just like, wait for it. No.
They're gonna talk about it, and then we'll do it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
At any rate, at some point they will actually, announce when registration is going to be. But the rumor is that it's going to be fall. And that'll be for 2021. So again, like the members you have now, you have them until the end of this year.
And I don't like. I mean, my hope is that we talk about the kids being resilient, or teaching resilience, but I hope that the volunteers are resilient as well enough to keep going. And I mean, from what I've seen, like I'm sure there is I'm sure there's a lot of that resilience going around and being quite prevalent. But we should also support those that maybe are struggling with trying to keep a program together. So I don't know if there's ways to, open and have more inclusion from different groups that might not have a regular program or anything like that. But, it's a thought that had crossed my mind is like, you have that one, you already have a small group that's kind of struggling and then COVID hits and now you need to come up with ideas for virtual meetings and that kind of stuff. And although the ideas are out there, they're harder to implement when you're potentially a smaller team. So
potentially, but like what I was kind of driving towards is like, so, I mean, and in a way, it's a little bit early to really figure this out now because, at least in Alberta, we're not going to really have an idea of what the school year is going to look like in September until early August.
Yeah.
Right? So, in a way, asking this now is, like, in a way, asking your parents now, hey, are you coming back to scouting next year? Mm-hmm. It's a little premature. But equally, at the very least, you'll collect the definite no's.
Yeah. You'll also collect the
The definite yeses.
in August kind of thing, or the whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean, like broadly speaking, if you ask the question now, you'll probably get roughly 3 to 4 different answers. You'll get the definite no's,
Mhm.
you'll get the definite yeses, because there will be a few of those. And then, yeah, you'll get the deferrals, right? Well, I'm not sure right now. Ask me in August.
Yeah.
But
Or the
even if you have
ultimate.
that,
I'm waiting for this benchmark to be met before I allow my kids.
or that too, right? Yeah. But you know what? That's still workable, right? Because the people who are definite no's, okay, fine. Well, we're sorry to see you go. But you know, like equally, okay, fine. Like we're gonna lose them, and that's just we know that. The definite yeses, as long as it's not just the Scouters kids already. If you have any, which could be the problem. This could be the problem. But if you have definite yeses from families who are not, you know, if some of your definite yeses are not just Scouters kids, then that's a potential, right? Like there's potential there to talk to them about, you know, hey, like we are probably going to need more volunteers to really pull this program off in the fall and into next year. Would you be interested? You've got the whole summer to get trained, you know?
Yeah.
In terms of, you know, Scouts Canada is still urging the use of virtual meetings in some cases. And one thing that I didn't really intend for this to become a suggestions podcast, but now I'm just on a roll. So here we go. One thing that struck me, I was reading a while ago a book called 99 Thoughts on Leading Volunteers by Kent Julian. And like Kent is the founder of, he's a motivational speaker. He's also worked in church ministry for a long time. And the book is actually like its main focus is building church ministry teams. But one thing that he wrote in here, I went back to it again after I read through some of this stuff that Scouts Canada put out. Point 23 in his book, and again, it's called 99 Thoughts on Leading Volunteers. Point 23 that he makes, he says, I have found that volunteers tend to commit to service year in and year out if I schedule breaks into the annual ministry calendar. I've also found that they tend to serve with more enthusiasm and passion when I schedule breaks throughout the year. Think about it. Even if you love your job, you need time off. In the same way, I think, you know, weekends and vacation when putting together my annual youth ministry calendar. For me, weekends revolve around series. For instance, let's say your small group program occurs on Sunday evenings. In that case, it's good to schedule in weekend breaks. Or a good way to schedule in weekend breaks is to plan like a 3 to 5 week series. And then when the series is over, take the next week off. And it occurs to me that, you know, like, especially because, you know, we are going to be relying more on the volunteers, and we are going to be having to be a lot more creative with our scheduling to keep with all of these new guidelines. That might not be a bad way to do it. It's just, you know what, design your programming in these little sprints, and then just have a week where, you know what, we're not really doing anything. Or maybe the most you do is, you know, like 2 Scouters who are maybe, you know, keen to not take that week off. Just sign into a Google Meet or a Zoom meeting, and if the youth want to show up and like ask questions about badges they're working on or just shoot the breeze for a little while, they can, but it's like a no obligations thing, right?
Right.
It's like nobody needs to show up. If the 2 Scouters just end up talking for half an hour and then hanging it up, fine, whatever. But, you know, like, just it's because that also then allows you to kind of shift towards that more year-round programming focus, right? That allows you to think about your programming in a way that's, you know, it's like, well, okay, you know what? Yeah, sure, we're going to just, and I mean, like, maybe you could take a couple weeks off here and there, right? You know, like if everybody wants to go camping or something during the summer, you know, summer vacation plans, it's like, okay, well, you know what? We'll take a couple weeks off here and there. But you know, like it's a good framework for building year-round programming, because you're sort of getting this focus of like, okay, well, we're going to do this little sprint of, you know, well, we're going to work on like this stuff, right? Or like, especially if you have a larger group and you have to have like 2 layers do this, 2 layers do this, 2 layers do this other thing over here, and then they rotate week to week. Um, like you can build really good topical content, and then you just take a week off when it's all done. Which is like, okay, cool guys, free evening, just take it easy. The volunteers take it easy. The kids don't have to worry about it. Unless you're doing like a badge check-in, that's entirely, again, like no obligation, totally optional, whatever. And then you pick up with your next series of whatever it is you're working on. It could work. I don't know. That's one of the bigger ideas that's come to mind for me. Just because, like you said at the more towards the beginning, right? Like how this plays out, however this plays out, what's going to be the normal on the far side of it is not going to be the same as the normal before.
Mm-hmm.
But that's okay. We can roll with it, and we can change our strategies, and we can find ways to continue, I think, delivering good program. And again, you know what? It's not a bad thing that we can't do meetings indoors for the first few months after we resume in-person meetings. It's actually going to be really good for the scouts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if I have much more to add to that, but it's we should just be willing to at least try it, right? Like that's kind of digging in our heels and complaining about it won't get it done any faster. So we should make the attempt to use the structure for what it is, and then provide useful feedback to the people that make the decisions, and hopefully instigate change that way.
Pretty much. Well, hang on a minute. Let me just quickly make sure that I don't have any shout-outs to give, because if not, I do have a little announcement.
Do
you know what episode this is?
I do not.
We just entered the triple digits.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Welcome, good sir, to episode 100.
We should, have an audio clip of like fireworks going off and people.
Yeah, cheering. Yeah. I'll see if I can find something. Yeah. For sure.
Episode 100, and some things of note is that we surpassed the Bernie Sanders podcast for that brief moment.
Yes, that was a highlight. That was genuinely a highlight.
Good times.
Good times. That said, okay, so I do have a couple little shout-outs. But before I get to that, so one of the things that I had in my mind, and I've been doing this with the other podcast for a while now, but I'm thinking I'm going to start trying to do it with ours as well. So starting with this episode, I'm going to build a YouTube channel.
Oh.
And you will be able to find the episodes full length on the YouTube channel. I'm not recording video, don't worry. You're not going to see my smiling face. But there's a little service I use. It's called Headliner, and it'll just sort of auto-generate like a waveform video. But you know what? Full-length video, the audio of the podcast, it'll all be up on YouTube. And then going forward, I might try and start doing other things on the YouTube channel. I want to do some staff carving over the summer with my kids. I have somewhere around here in my office, I have an American Pinewood Derby car kit and a Canadian Cub car kit, and I want to do like an unboxing and sort of compare and contrast what's in the boxes, if there's even any difference, which there might not be. I actually don't know. I haven't opened them yet.
You should build the identical car and race it down the track and see which one races better.
Yeah, or something. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see whose nails have the better just default traction.
Yes.
But anyways, so that'll be a thing. We are now on. I mean, granted, I'm leaving myself like 2 days, and one of them is Canada Day to build a YouTube channel. But whatever, who cares? I can do it. Okay, so yeah, that'll be a thing. We will soon be on YouTube.
Yay!
But then also, I do have a couple of shoutouts. So, yes, first is Scudder Carl. He wrote in a little while ago, And unfortunately, Carl, I apologize. I totally didn't even get notified that you sent a message. So I apologize. But he says, "Hi there, I'm a scout leader and group scout leader with a group in Stockport, England. I've been listening to your podcast for a couple months now, probably since the lockdown began, I think, when I did a search for as many different podcasts as I could find about scouting." Well, thank you, sir. He says, "We've been running weekly meetings using Zoom as well as making use of Microsoft Teams and SharePoint. Interesting. Putting on virtual camps, making at-home programs and challenges for our members to use. Trying to come up with meeting ideas that we wouldn't normally be able to do in a face-to-face setting. And so far, I've planned to take the scouts to Brazil, do a virtual tour of the Museo de Arte de Sao Paulo to earn an artist activity badge. They're going to have a competition to see who can dock the Crew Dragon capsule to the ISS in the shortest time without crashing. I think there's an online simulator that lets you do that. And we're also trying to do some community outreach without going out. As part of our World Challenge badge, we need to try and make contact with scouts from another country. And so, Carl, I apologize for not following up on this sooner, but I will see if I can arrange to do that. I'm pretty sure my Orange Troop scouts would be keen on doing that. And I will also just say, Carl says, if you could help me out or pass this message on to anyone who could help, he'd be very much obliged. He'd love to communicate with scouts in another part of the world. So I will see if my Orange Troop scouts would like to do that, Carl. And again, sorry. Anybody else who's listening to this podcast, let me know if your group would be interested, and I can try and put you in touch with Carl as well. And maybe you can chat with some scouts from England. Apparently they meet at 7:30 p.m., which I guess in mountain time terms would be 12:30. Might actually be 1:30 right now. Depends. But so kind of lunchtime, early afternoon. But at any rate, thank you, Carl, for writing in. And I will dash off a reply to you as soon as I finish recording this episode. Also had Gord, a big thank you to Gord writing in from Airdrie. He's a scouter down in Airdrie, I believe. And he says, "Hey there, love the program. I thought this would be some interesting scouting news for you. After almost 35 years, the city of Airdrie is tearing down its scout hall. It's a sad time for us, for sure, but we are looking forward to a new future." And again, you know what, actually, I smashed my phone, and so then I wound up changing phones, and then I wound up I smashed my phone in my car door. It fell out of my pocket just as I was getting into my car and I was closing the door. Flukiest timing. I have it in front of me here. It's just a mess. It's just a mess. So then I press ganged an old iPhone into service. And then my sister-in-law, her iPhone died. And so I gave her my iPhone. And I picked up an Android One smartphone, the Motorola One Action. I'm really quite happy with it. So, but in juggling phones twice in the span of a month, I missed a lot of notifications. So I did actually respond to Gord, say, hey, thanks for listening. I missed your message initially. I did actually work that story into a Scouting 5 episode a little while back. It is sad to see the Airdrie Scout Hall go, but I totally understand the reasoning behind that. But anyways, so Carl, Gord, thanks for writing in. Awesome to hear from you both. And again, if you would like to... and of course, well, as always, a big shout out to Scouting Radio for rebroadcasting our episodes to their worldwide audience. If you're listening to us on Scouting Radio right now, or if you would like to get in touch with Carl and his scouts, then by all means do reach out, let me know. Get in touch. We would love to hear from you.
Scouter Ken.
Yes, sir.
Do tell. How does one get a hold of us?
The email address has changed. No, it hasn't. It has not changed in the least. It is still scoutingstuffpodcast@gmail.com or at outlook.com. Either one works. You can also leave us a voice message at scoutingstuffpodcast.com. Just pop out the sidebar. There will be a link. You can record right in your browser. Twitter.com/SSYSK podcast, Instagram or Facebook.com/scoutingstuffpodcast. We are, what are we at TikTok again? I can never remember. What is the TikTok address here? We are at Scouting Stuff Podcast at TikTok. Yes, you can send direct messages. Someone did actually, sort of. No, I sent them a message. Never mind. I sent them a message. But you know what? You can also join us on Discord. There'll be a link in the show notes. It's how we're recording this episode right now. You're always welcome to participate in episodes or just lurk as we record. Send us a message on Discord. That's all good. You can also leave us a review on iTunes. Please consider doing that as well. adds to the visibility of the podcast whenever people like Carl go looking for scouting content. The more reviews, the more that we bubble up in the results. All right. Well, I think it's about everything I got for tonight. And I imagine you probably want to rest after a busy day of deck and work and all of that.
Yeah. And I need to turn in. I have to get up early tomorrow and head off to site. So.
For sure. Okay, well, thank you then for tuning in. Thank you out there for listening, and until next time, be prepared.